You tramped all the way from Minnesota. Why is that?
I wanted to catch a spark.
If you're traveling in the North Country Fair.
They say no one wants to hear what a kid wrote last month.
Well, I like your songs.
Where the winds hit heavy on the borderline.
Who wrote this?
He did.
Arise Play Nigeria. Something I appreciate very much about you, Mr. Mangold, is that your directing style is very adaptable. You have a Spielberg quality where you have that adaptability of style. You can do the action, quick cutting intensity. But in this film, I love that you would hold shots and commit to them and enable your actor to control the moment, which can be risky and can go wrong. So how did you know what to do to make it work, especially when you have the musical performances?
Well, in many ways, thank you. That's very kind. And I do have a great deal of admiration for Stephen, who's a friend and who and I've admired all my life. And I do think that it's strange to me that I'm one of the few directors who kind of I mean, certainly directors before me have, from Howard Hawks to John Ford to Stephen to there's many directors, Sidney Pollack and Sidney Lumet, and who have made many kinds of movies.
Yeah.
But in a funny way, I shoot every movie the same. Like I bring my sensibility to each movie and every day's work and scene the same way. There's no reason to take a moment, for instance, between Bob Dylan and Joan Baez alone in an apartment and turn it into an action piece or overcut it. You, in a way, I mean, I think you're getting at a really interesting point, but in a way, what does a movie like this offer an audience? It's not really, even though it's sold that way, as just facts or biography, because there's many medium that can do that. What we offer you is a sense of a kind of intimacy with these characters that no other form can have. Even documentaries that were made at the time they were actually happening, the film, Bob was aware they were shooting a documentary, and so he's performing, in the documentary. And the actual intimacy of what it is to be these people at this moment, these songs being born, their feelings for each other, their loves, their resentments, their jealousies, their all of these energies behind the eyes and underneath the songs becomes what you want to investigate. And just for my own sensibility, because as a storyteller, we have all these tools, the cut is a very aggressive way to try and kind of come at intimacy. You want to feel the energy between people, the kind of the electricity between them. And so that's a long answer to.
Now, in the film you did, you're singing and playing instruments yourself. Do you feel that decision was motivated more by telling Bob Dylan's story, by the nature of artist he is? It almost demands that level of authenticity. Or do you feel it was motivated more by your own artistic desire to explore the breadth of your abilities as a performer?
I would say 80% the latter and 20% the former. I think of like Rami Malek in Bohemian Rhapsody, or Natalie Portman and Jackie, and those two biopics having these iconic sort of step-by-step sequences, for lack of a better word, choreography, where the people they were playing, the moments they were playing, are so well known in the public eye, you have to match them step for step. This, conversely, is about folk music, and folk music is the music of authenticity. It's the music of interpretation, and particularly in the case of Bob Dylan, he was taking the form of old Irish ballads, the form of sort of Dust Bowl songs in the Midwest, and personalizing and making them true to him. So, and he rarely played a song the same way. He would play album versions different live, so it felt, inauthentic and corny to some extent to try to mimic what were very spontaneous choices to him in the music studio. That's the long-winded answer, and also it was a lot more fun to do it live. And I fell in love with this music over 5 years, so I feel like if God was passing lyrics through Bob Dylan, which is the theory on how good his writing was through his early 20s, I felt like a humble asterisk on getting to be the actor who brought life to the moment where God was speaking through Bob Dylan.
Starring alongside the younger stars is veteran star of Fight Club and The Incredible Hulk, Edward Norton, who plays the musician Pete Seeger, a stalwart of the folk.
Your character of Pete Seeger, over the course of the film, he ends up in a really heartbreaking position where he can identify the greatness of Bob Dylan and it could revitalize and propel folk music to new heights. But he can also identify that the greatness of Bob Dylan cannot be contained to traditional folk music. And so we feel such sympathy for him. And then I wondered if, as an actor, you personally felt sympathy for Pete's untenable position, and that informed or influenced your interpretation of him in the film.
Yeah, I think empathy with your characters, that's sort of the nature of it, is living within those conflicts. I think paradoxical emotions and conflict are what make these things interesting, and I think they are what made that whole moment interesting, because the kind of integrity that Pete Seeger and many others involved with not only the folk music scene but the political activism of the time. There were some artists like Pete Seeger who had an enormous amount of integrity, I think, as humanists and as artist activists, and people deeply committed to the movement of social rights and anti-war and all of it. And then there are people like Bob Dylan who had enormous integrity to their own musical and their artistic line. Dylan followed his own line relentlessly, and the two sometimes wove together. They wove together for a period, and then they
Yeah.
diverged. And so in some sense, it's the paradox of there are things to admire in both forms of integrity, and unpacking the difficult emotions. It's what makes it juicy. Jim Mangold uses the word juicy a lot. Anytime we were trying to resolve something, he's as a director, he was great at reminding everybody to stay in the juicy conflicts and paradoxes, and yeah, it's exactly what makes it rich, you know.
A complete unknown focus.
I have a great respect for actors who can speak to the audience without using any dialogue. And a lot of your performance in this film hinges on communicating to the audience the emotional torment of this woman that is never fully verbalized. So for you as an actor, did that make the role easier or harder to play?
That's interesting. I mean, I think that Sylvie has such a complex inner life, like you were saying. I think it was very, the challenges of playing her were kind of just that of kind of what you just said. Because I think for me, I think she could have been so easily categorized just as the girlfriend part
Yeah.
or that role. And that would James Mangold, our brilliant director. I mean, that's something that Jim and I talked about because that's he wanted the opposite of that completely. And, Sylvia, and it's written in the script, but also, I had to challenge myself to, lift her up and be able to bring that kind of depth to each scene. And just to make her a really fully fleshed out person. And she's a really grounded force in the film, I think, in a lot of ways is kind of the lens, it's like the audience's lens, because she is kind of one of the people. She's not a singer, she's not famous, and she's a private person. She doesn't want the public life. So I was aware that that was kind of my job of in the film, and ultimately is kind of I guess in a lot of ways the most kind of heartbreaking. It's a real emotional part of the film and their relationship, because Sylvie meant so much to Bob, who's based on Sue's Rotolo real life. But and Bob Dylan has said, how much she still means to him, even though she's since passed. But there's also like music was playing all the time on set. Everyone was playing their instruments and singing, and especially that the music and the folk music of that time, and Bob Dylan's music especially, it's so emotional. So I did feel like such an openness through the music that even though there's you're not saying anything, you're just listening, you kind of can't help but be engulfed in that.
Yeah. And what you said about the character is based on a real person, but she has this evergreen story of the girl who likes the boy she can never fully have. So when you've got something that is so universally familiar to people, did you find that accessing the emotions you required was easily accessible without the need for profound amounts of character study?
Yeah, I mean, I read her, Suze wrote a book called A Freewheelin' Time that really captures the relationship that she had with Bob, and also really puts you in that time period of youth in the West Village in the 60s. It was such a particular time, and she herself was a painter and an artist and activist, and she's really the one who got Bob politically involved. He wasn't as aware of what was going on in politics, but she brought him into that, and was such an inspiration for him. So yeah, I think for me, I'm like, repeat exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, that you can
say.
easily access the emotions you required because it's such a human story.
Yeah. I also think, all of us have a first love and knows what that feels like. So not that I use like my real life experiences, but still it's a part of our DNA. It's a part of who you are subconsciously. So I think that just kind of accessing that part of myself, and some of those memories that we all have, I wouldn't say nothing's ever easy on a set, but I think working with incredible actors and an incredible director, they really pave the way to make it feel effortless and comfortable and easy. And having, doing scenes, a scene partner like Timmy was, that does make it easy because he's so brilliant in this part. And we also were friends before this and had done a movie previously. So we had that familiarity and kind of safeness and comfortability that I think was really important for Sylvie and Bob in this particular movie. So.
Oh, bravo. It's translated on screen. Thank you for talking with us.
Thank you.
You came here with nothing but a guitar. You never talk about your family, your past.
People make up their past, Sylvie. They remember what they want. They forget the rest.
I want to know which side he's on.
I'm not sure they want to hear what I want to play, Johnny.
I want to hear it.
I thought that a really powerful theme in the movie is kind of proverbial in a sense, where the older generation inspires the new generation, and then they evolve and they innovate and inevitably leave the old generation behind. And the way you went about your performance, juxtaposed with Timothee's, it really brought that out. So I just wondered, was that intentional and something you did consciously?
I think I would credit Jim and the wonderful way the story is written with that. I think one of the first things Jim said to me that he was interested in was, among many things, was how quickly things that are anti-establishment can become establishment. I mean, in the 50s, the folk music were the ultimate outsiders. They were. That was the punk rock of its time.
They were the rebels.
And the whole idea, in some sense, that in a few short years, a certain kind of conservatism, if you want to call it that, was being applied by the folk scene toward rock and roll, toward thing is, it's maybe it's human nature. I don't know, but I love that idea that Jim said that the unorthodox can become orthodox very quickly.
Yeah.
Musician and activist Joan Baez documented her own memories of her tumultuous love affair with Bob Dylan, and that forms part of the story of Dylan's evolution as a musical artist in a politically charged time in America and a
play Joan Baez in this film. She's a contemporary of Bob Dylan, and while they're both stars, they're both in the same field, I noticed that there's never a tone of competition between them in the dynamic of their relationship. It's either they're inspired by each other or creatively frustrated by each other. Was maintaining that dynamic of a non-competitive nature deliberate when you were developing the characters?
It's interesting. I think there have been some different interpretations of that. And I think, we actually shot it in a way where there were options. Because I think that's something that can really be designed in sort of the third and final stage of a film. James Mangold gets to choose whether he wants to cut to a bitter look or not. So I think we actually we actually left space for there to possibly be that. And I think, I mean, what Jim often said to me was it was very important to him to have Joan's autonomy present. I wouldn't say that there wasn't a competitive nature between Joan and Bob in reality. And so we left the option open, but I think for Jim and I appreciate this in the end that Joan sort of holds her own. She's this independent spirit, and she because in reality there was so much more going on for her life at this time too. She was a major civil rights activist, and she was in peace talks. I mean, she was developing this whole other side of her life, and so in the years that transpire in this film, she doesn't live or die by what Bob does. And so I appreciated that is the choice that James made in the end. That it isn't, there isn't a bitter competitive spirit between them. She's got her own thing going on. And I appreciate that you recognize that.
Yeah, I liked that about it, because I felt it would be too tunneled if they went that way.
I agree.
With folk music to singers, it's kind of like theater to actors. There's nowhere to hide. It's very unforgiving because it's stripped back, it's raw, it's honest. So when this opportunity for this role came across to you, it's great to do a biopic, it's great to do a musical biopic, but did you ever think to yourself that unforgiving nature of what folk music is, it might be a bit too daunting? So did you hesitate with the choice at any point?
You know, I had loads of terror doing this, taking on this role. Joan's voice is absolutely magnificent. It's iconic. You can't replicate it. But I think actually in folk music, one of the wonderful things about it is some of its messiness. And Joan is not a messy singer by any stretch, or guitarist. But the folk scene itself, I think, lends itself to a naturalness that I think we really embraced. And I really appreciate that our sound department was willing to, and in post, they were willing to really allow for some of the mistakes and rawness to come out. In House of the Rising Sun, I pushed the mic away and sing, and we used, my voice from that day. And it's not perfect, but what you get, thanks to them, like taking a step back and not overproducing it, is this feeling of she's in this room, and it sort of draws you in. And it takes a lot of different components to do that. It's not just, my performance. It's trusting that the audio quality is messy and intimate in the way that it should be, and to just kind of not touch it. And so, I mean, it's like she does have a lot of precision, but the folk scene also has this natural, raw, kind of like in the moment thing. And so I feel like they just did a really wonderful job of capturing both, that everyone's really talented and at the top of their game, but also there is that richness of in the moment, messy, organic sound.
Yeah. I mean, as an analyst, I always say directors should trust their actors, and James did that in this film. So bravo, and thank you for talking with us.
Yeah, thank you for talking. Nice to meet you.
How about that Joan Baez, folks? But she's pretty. Sings pretty. Maybe a little too pretty.
Your songs are like an oil painting at the dentist's office.
You're kind of an asshole, Bob.
If you go with snowflake storm, when the river's freezing, summer ends.
For anyone who's gonna hold your attention on stage, you have to kind of be a freak. You can be beautiful or you can be ugly, but you can't be plain.
To keep her from the howling winds.
When thinking of Bob Dylan has been culturally significant almost as long as most people have had cognitive memory. And the unique thing about him is that it's not just the music, the voice, the songwriting, it's who he is as a person that has made him so captivating and enigmatic. So how daunting was the journey of that led you to Timothée Chalamet, to know he was the right one to embody all those facets of a human being the world knows so well?
Well, in a way, do we know him very well?
True.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not challenging you. I'm just saying it's an interesting, perplexing question. I mean, I felt like I got to know him for myself pretty well, working on it and talking with him a lot. But the reality is sometimes as a filmmaker, you know, I'm guiding all my actors. I have to write a script that works for all my characters, so I have to love all my characters and kind of feel all my characters. In a project like this, the easy assumptions, you know, like Bob Dylan is arrogant or difficult or enigmatic, or those become the things I'm most interested in trying to get to get around, to get underneath. Is he really so enigmatic? You know, I've spent hours and hours with him. He's not very enigmatic in person. And is it more that he, you know, and so then you start asking yourself questions. What if you or I had this talent for writing music that propelled us to the center of the world stage? But what if we never really, what if we're really good at writing and singing, but we're not equipped to deal with thousands of millions of eyes upon us, analyzing why we wore those jeans today, why we walked down that street, what were we shopping for at the store that day? What if that's something that never occurred to the person is part of the deal? And unlike other celebrities, of course, current celebrities are online, you know, on social media all the time going, here I am buying a shirt. Here I am, you know, walking in the park. Here I am riding my bicycle. But what if, you know, I don't think he's cut from that cloth. I think his offering to audiences is his music.
Yeah.
And that in a way, he has a very classical idea that that's where it ends. You're not entitled to my privacy and to my personal thoughts about and actions at all times. And that when someone doesn't play by the rules that we expect, we suddenly label them as somehow odd or different. And actually, in many ways, I think his behavior and comportment is less odd than people who somehow go, yes, take me all 24 hours a day, which is its own mystery and enigmatic. Why would you want to give the world all of yourself all the time? But the other part where Bob made his own trouble is when he realized people wanted to know all about him, everything about him. Some people just say no comment, right?
Yeah.
But he would make up stories. And and that's where there's a playfulness to this man, where he kind of recognizes that the currency of the relationship with the press and media and the public is in stories to tell, cool stories to tell that are like a fairy tale and turn your life and you make a headline or and so in some ways, I think, especially when he was younger, he actually had fun with that dynamic. And I think that contributed to the way people characterize him. But at least for the times I've gotten to know him, I think a lot of this is less thought out than it is just kind of the moment-to-moment reaction to the pressures upon him.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us.
Really intelligent questions. Very much enjoyed it. Have a great
Mr.
day.
Mangold, I'm a fan. I'm a groupie of yours, so you nailed it on this film. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
When's the new album out?
Soon. 200 people in that room, and each one wants me to be somebody else. And they should just let me be.
Let you be what?
Whatever it is they don't want me to be.
I hear Bob is playing electric.
Not on our stage, he isn't.
Oh my God, it's Bob Dylan.
Once upon a time, you're just so fine.
They just want me singing Blowing in the Wind for the rest of my goddamn life.
Then you.
Well, this is gonna piss some people off.
Do you think that the nature of Bob Dylan lends itself that this could just end up evolving into an anthology of films that show different segments of his life because he's such a different kind of artist.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think you could say that about many of the people who collided with each other in this period of the early '60s. So many of them have had these enormous tapestries in their lives and careers and phases and changes. And I was thinking about the fact that Pete Seeger was born in 1919. You know, he was a very different generation, and he cut his teeth in the socialist labor music of the 30s and in the post-war era. And you know, This Land Is Your Land was written by Woody Guthrie during the Depression, and Pete Seeger was friends with him even before he was 20 years old, you know, and cut to, you know, in 2008, Pete Seeger played This Land Is Your Land at the inauguration of Barack Obama. And you think about the span of what he saw and the phases and changes that he went through from the war to the McCarthy era and the blacklist, and then the 60s, and then the Vietnam, and to have endured, you know, I was thinking about the fact that he and John Lewis, the great congressman who was on the March to Selma, you know, if you looked at Obama's inauguration, there really were very few people who had survived to see that, who had been there through all of that. And Pete Seeger and John Lewis were both, you know, the real elder statesmen. And it's pretty profound when you think about its span. And now Dylan, who's in his 80s, I mean, that, you know, my favorite the record of Dylan's that really hooked me in was Blood on the Tracks, and that's long after the era of this film, you know. Yeah. And then I love his record World Gone Wrong in the 90s. It's like he, you know, it's just incredibly protean and shape-shifting artist, like, and so yeah, I think but you know, in what you observed is something I think was a wisdom of Jim's, which was he really in no way was attempting to follow, I guess, any line of what you might call the biopic sort of structures. He really, I think he was really deeply committed to just looking at this brief emergent moment, and what was interesting about the collisions of these people and how it produced this magical moment of fertility and magic in a lot of ways, and but couldn't last, you know. Yeah. And I like that. I think it makes it more, you know, I don't want to, people really, I think it's really important for people to take in things and make their own interpretation of them. I never think it's, I mean, if there was anything, you know, I think Bob Dylan is very inspiring about it. It's that he leaves you to meaning. Yeah, he was very resistant to unpacking meaning in his work for people. He really wanted you to derive meaning, and I think that's really true. I think that's really true.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, your performance yet again is a great one. So thank you. And it's really great to talk to you.
Thanks for the great questions.
Bob Dylan has held a place of esteem as one of the most artistically significant figures in popular culture, and his journey as an artist continues to be reflected in the journey
film. We see that as Bob transitions to electric, he butts heads with more traditional folk musicians like Pete Seeger, and it almost turns into essentially a battle for who best represents the essence of folk music. And ironically, the film comes out in a year where exactly the same thing has happened in rap music between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, where it's a battle for the soul of rap culture. So it's an existential crisis that's timeless. Having explored this time in Bob Dylan's life, do you feel you find more connection with the purists like Pete Seeger or the mavericks like Bob Dylan?
Wow, great question. I like the framing of that because that's a great question. I mean, I'd say the difference between the metaphor that you illuminated about the struggle in our year's culture is Bob Dylan was the maverick, and he sort of had the artistic legitimacy, and the higher hand, even if at the time people didn't see it. I think personally I identify more with the maverick quality because you got to keep pushing the edge. This is too weird a life and a career to choose to do it consistently or politically, you know, because why choose to be an actor or an artist if you're going to show up the same way each time? There's a lot more restful jobs to choose than something like this. You know, I guess I don't want to speak too much on that other stuff because I get clickbaited or whatever, but like, what was interesting is what we saw this year was sort of like the inverse where like popular sentiment was actually with an artist as opposed to maybe someone whose commercial dominance had been.
Because that's why I asked the question, because it's an awkward one, because the popularity versus the authenticity flipped for this battle that we saw in rap, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we saw, beyond the quality of songs and the battle environment, you saw pop culture at large get behind the Nobel figure and the Pulitzer figure, you know, and it was a fascinating thing to watch this year. Yeah.
Well, Timothée Chalamet, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Those were the best questions I got the entire press tour.
Lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Turn it down!
Play it live.
Make some noise, BD.